Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered, the podcast exploring what really happens to your identity, ambition, and career when you become a mother. Matrescence is the transition into motherhood, and it's one of the biggest identity shifts a woman will ever go through. Yet, when it comes to our careers, it's still barely understood. So often, motherhood gets framed as something to push through and bounce back from.
We think it's something else entirely, a capability shift, and we think it's time to name it and to talk about it properly. I'm Rose, coach, consultant, and researcher completing a master's in organisational psychology.
And I'm Bianca, a chief marketing officer, pregnant, and living this experience in real time. Each episode, we take one belief about motherhood and work that doesn't hold up under scrutiny and break it down properly.
Using research, lived experience, and honest conversations about what sustainable high performance actually looks like when your identity is shifting.
Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered. We're really glad you're here.
Welcome back. Today's conversation is one I think so many listeners will find both reassuring and inspiring. We spend a lot of time talking about the tension between ambition and motherhood. But what if success didn't have to look the way we've been taught? What if we could design a life and a business that actually support the season we're in rather than constantly fighting against it? Today's guest is Sophie Cliff, author of The Hustle Cure and Choose Joy, coach and founder of The Joyful Coach. Sophie's work centers around something I find incredibly refreshing. The idea that joy isn't something we stumble across once everything else is sorted. It's something we can intentionally cultivate, backed by positive psychology and evidence-based practices. In this episode, we talk about redefining ambition after becoming a mother, designing a business around family life rather than squeezing family around work, and the choices Sophie has made while raising her 2 children. We also explore the science of joy, why it's far more than toxic positivity, and how small intentional practices can help us experience more fulfillment in a chaotic life and through motherhood. Whether you're navigating a career pivot, wondering how to hold on to your identity alongside motherhood, or simply craving permission to do things differently, I think you're going to enjoy this one. Sophie, welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been listening since the first episode, so I can't wait to chat.
I'm personally so excited to have you on, Sophie, because you and I met about a decade ago, working together through some career coaching I was doing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that, as I recall, was a real pivot moment for you because you were looking at your corporate career. You were thinking, what more can I do? What can that look like before motherhood? So this conversation feels particularly meaningful for me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to diving in because I think, there has been so much learning for me throughout my matrescence before that, anticipating motherhood, and it's so woven into who I am and what I do and what I support other people with as well. It will be 7 years this autumn since I sort of left my last corporate job and went all in building my own practice. And my children are 3.5 and 1. So it was a little bit before I had started to, actively try for a family and put that into place. But I had definitely started to think about what that was going to look like. And I was very, very conscious and aware when I was in corporate settings that there seemed to be this like trade-off between flexibility and ambition. And I kept seeing in lots of different, not just the organizations that I was in, but lots of other organizations where my friends were, where peers and colleagues were, that it almost seemed to be that once you became a mum, once you had sort of stepped forward and started a family, there was this trade-off. You could either be in the office all the time, trying to work like you didn't have children and you could, continue to be ambitious and to progress, or you could go part-time, and that was kind of like putting a ceiling on your ambition and your opportunity within your career. And that felt really challenging to me because work is a big part of my identity. It always has been. I've always loved, working and developing and learning, and I'm really curious and I love working with other people. And I knew that I wasn't going to feel, or I had a strong assumption, I didn't know. I strongly assumed that I wasn't going to feel less ambitious once I had children. And I really also knew that I wanted to be able to be present and to enjoy my kids when they were little. And I didn't see it modeled anywhere within the corporate spaces that I was. And I think a lot has changed, in the last 7 years since I was last in the corporate world. But I didn't see it modeled that you could be ambitious, that you could want to keep learning and achieving and growing, and you could also be present for your family. So while I hadn't started my family when I made that pivot, it was definitely in the back of my mind that I don't know how I would make this work otherwise. And I wanted to almost I am a bit of a control freak, and that has been a lesson in and of itself throughout my motherhood journey, because as I'm sure you're learning, Bianca, we have such little control over these beings that we birth. But, I am a bit of a control freak, and it was almost like my way of planning for and, almost spotting this tension and planning to able to be able to navigate that. I knew that I wanted to still be able to grow, do new things, explore my curiosity, learn stuff, achieve things alongside being a mom.
So take us back to 7 years ago when you first built your practice. What were your goals at the time? How were you feeling? What advice would you give yourself going back to that moment?
Yeah. So for me, it was absolutely terrifying. And I think sometimes I forget that when I tell it in reverse, because it feels so like my norm now. But I had spent 10 years, I'd done an economics degree. I'd come straight into the corporate world. I had spent 10 years always with that next promotion in mind, that next pivot, that next move, surrounded by opportunities, learning and development, coaching, support. And it felt really quite terrifying actually to start out by myself. But I knew that I was making the right move because it was really rooted in my values and what I wanted to do. Basically, how I felt at the time was that I'd worked in lots of different organizations, some big global organizations too. My last role was in a small tech startup, but I always felt like I was sort of like a teeny tiny cog in a big machine. And it's really important for me to do work that makes an impact. And often I felt like, particularly in the bigger organizations, I could be in a coma for 6 months and nothing would happen to this organization. Everything will keep rumbling on. And of course, that's how they're designed to be. But that felt really challenging to me. And the part of my work that I always loved the most was managing teams, developing people. In my last role, I had a team of 80 people, predominantly women. And I loved that, that moment when you would see someone realize their potential, or, something would fall into place for them, or they would grow in confidence. That was what really excited me. And I'd also had a personal bereavement in 2016, which had really changed my relationship with ambition. I think my ambition before was very much rooted in ego. It was about status, power, money, how I could sort of project that I was, doing really well. It was less about how it felt to me. And that bereavement sort of changed my relationship with ambition and made me think more about wanting to be present, wanting to live my life and feel like I was having impact with my life. And so I felt like I wanted to be more connected with having that impact, doing something positive. I was really fascinated by, I loved coaching. I was doing that in my role day to day anyway, and I'd done some training in that, but I was really fascinated by positive psychology and wider psychology, how we could bring some of that stuff together. So I knew that I was kind of onto the right thing. I was filled with terror. I don't know if you can see some guitars behind me. My husband's a musician. My job was the stable, secure breadwinner. That was what covered everything. I had this real fear. And some of those fears were realized because I left my job in November 2019. We obviously then went straight into a pandemic, and I had this big moment of, what have I done? This is not giving me any of the flexibility that I wanted. Actually, it's just giving me lots of uncertainty throughout this time. But now going back, I'm I'm so glad that I did do that, because I don't know. I genuinely don't know how I would have sort of navigated starting a family and building that around that previous career that I had, where you really had to be all in. And I think what I love most about being able to do my work is that connection with other people, and is that constant learning through other people. That my value of curiosity is just fed every single day. So I think, yes, I wanted a lot more security and answers, I think, at the beginning. And I had to work with wonderful coaches like, Bianca and some other coaches to sort of help me get over some of that fear of the unknown, and to almost learn through action. I think that did prime me quite well for my matrescence as well. But it's something I've never, ever regretted. I am so glad that I did do it. And now I go back into a lot of those corporate organizations to deliver my workshops, to run training, to do coaching. And I love that I've got both parts, I think. I love that I can tap back into and remember what that was like and what I needed then. But I also love that I've got more of that freedom and flexibility that I was really craving.
It's really not lost on me, Sophie, that you had a crash course in preparing for uncertainty and just surrendering control before you became a mother.
Yeah.
I'm interested in early motherhood and how that's fueled your business since,
Yeah.
because I've seen you go from strength to strength. And watching your story over the years, I feel like I've seen you become more and more yourself
Yeah.
with your community, in the strength of your message, the clarity of your offering. Talk us through that link between early motherhood, this phase of the business, and what that looks like.
Yeah, I love that question because I really do feel, I feel like that has been my journey, is that I think before becoming a mum, I spent a lot of time retraining. I went back to university. I did a master's in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology. I was actively researching. I wrote my first book. I felt like I had to sort of be this expert of, this is what the research says, this is what the science says. I'm really passionate about being evidence-based and informed and, science-backed. And I think because of that, I kind of put myself in a box of like, I'm supposed to know all of the answers. I'm supposed to have the right models, the right frameworks, the right things to apply. And I think that is a big important part of it. But I also think we're all human. We all have different things to navigate. We all have different realities. And that is what motherhood has allowed me to do, is to go like, this is what worked for me before. It's not working for me today because I'm feeling this way. Or like, I've had, this amazing positive psychology toolkit to be able to tap into on those nights when you're thinking like, I don't know that I've slept more than 3 minutes before having to get out of bed and nurse and cuddle and, soothe the baby. I've had something to go back to. And I think there has been some relatability, I think, for the people that I work with in that. So even people who are not mothers, that's not within their sort of their life plan, I think they have perhaps taken some comfort from going like, oh, you can have all of the expertise and you can know all of the things, and life is still going to throw you a curveball and you're still going to have to navigate some of the tricky things. So I think it is given me that. On the one hand, there's been this like toolkit I've been able to use. There's been this like extra thing that I can use to relate with my clients and to relate with my community, which I think only makes you a better practitioner, to be able to understand how some of those things feel. But I think the other thing that it has really helped me with is it's sharpened my focus and it's sharpened my ambition in different ways. I have had this real sort of like shift in not necessarily like what is important to me or what I'm ambitious about, but in this acknowledgement that there is a set amount of time and there is a set amount of energy. I've had to just really hone in on what does make the biggest difference. Where can I add the most value? And I look back to my business, this time 4 years ago when I was pregnant with my first child, I was doing a lot of things that didn't really matter, that didn't really move the needle, that didn't add value. And I was saying yes to a lot of things because I felt like I should. And having kids is almost like giving me this permission slip to go, I don't have an abundance of time. I don't have all of this energy that I used to have. So therefore, I need to be really careful and really considered about where I'm going to place that. And I think that actually has almost helped my business and my career to grow in a way, because I've had to get very singular about my focus.
I love that. And I think what you've touched on there is something we often refer to as that ruthless prioritization.
Yeah.
So really being able to hone in on what is important. And I really liked what you said there as well around like having models. So I'm doing my master's in organizational psychology at the moment. I'm just in the final stretch of it, finishing off my dissertation. And yes, it's amazing to have models and frameworks to help structure things. But I think what you've described there, which I've definitely found as part of my research and through coaching as well, is that the people you're speaking to and the people you're helping are human beings, and they're all very different.
Yeah.
And I think there's that lens. And then the other lens is the research and the frameworks were built off something that's maybe a little bit out of date. Like women haven't always been included as part of research. So I think for you not to have all the answers based on these like, quite rigid frameworks, these scientifically backed frameworks, is perfectly human.
Yeah.
Because as I said, like a lot of the research wasn't done around women, and you do have to treat people very differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think that is such like an insightful way of looking at it. It's difficult within an industry that is unregulated to feel like you're rooting things and wanting to do things the right way. And I think perhaps that for me was a little bit of a hangover from my corporate life, where there was a right way and there was like a structure and a ladder and something to follow, and then to just sort of like be aimless building your own practice. And there's best practice, there's things that you can learn, but there isn't a sense of strict regulation or a framework or a sort of model that you have to move through, like there are in other areas of of psychology. So for me, it was always really important that I did have that like grounding in that evidence base and that training. But I think there is a shift that happens when, like you say, you realize different things are going to work for different people in different phases of life, and different things work for me on different days. So knowing that and acknowledging that brings a different dynamic, I think.
So as I record this with a newborn on my lap, I am really curious about how you structure your week.
Mhm.
You do a lot of things. How does it all look? And I would love to hear what really works and what you're still also figuring out in terms of scheduling, balancing, and some of the things that feel hard as well.
Yeah. So I love this question because this is what I would have wanted 4 years ago, someone to write down for me, like, what does this actually look like? How do you practically do it? So
A step-by-step
yeah.
guide for our listeners.
Yeah. So from a practical perspective, what it looks like is that I currently work around 3 days a week. And obviously there is flexibility to that. So I was just at the weekend at a festival delivering some talks as part of that. So that was an additional day that wouldn't normally fall under my typical childcare. But usually one day a week, my husband has the children, they go to childcare 2 days a week. And then I sort of top and tail the week with a day with the kids. And that to me at the moment feels like a really, really great balance. Up until my son was one, I was just working for one day a week. So the day a week that my husband could have them. And that felt so scattered and all over the place and so pressurized. But the thing with running your own business is you don't get the nice cushy like year-long maternity leave, or it wasn't what was right for me, for my business and the way, I've built my practice. So right now I kind of practically have 3 days a week of childcare, which is a lot less than, I used to have pre-kids, but actually with that sharper focus and with that sharper clarity, I don't feel like my productivity is vastly different. And I actually wrote a book that came out at the start of last year called The Hustle Cure, which was looking at burnout and productivity specifically from a female perspective. And I wrote this book because when I was pregnant with my daughter, I bought all of the productivity and time management books because I was like, I need to learn how to schedule better and block my time. And I need to understand how I'm going to practically make this work. And I really quickly realized that these books were all written by men, and men of a very like specific type. So it was like white men in positions of power, usually, that had a team to help them navigate, the logistics of life. And B, there was no sort of recognition of like some of those differences that we might face as women, as caregivers, both from like a biological makeup. We have different strengths, we have different productivity pits and peaks, we have hormonal fluctuations, but also from like a societal perspective of like what is expected of us and the pressures that we put on women. And that book really unlocked lots of things for me. I got very angry at lots of research and I got very excited by lots of research. But I think what it really helped us to do, because I wrote that when we just had my daughter, so we just had one child, and we were finding the balance worked quite well in that my husband had flexibility in his job, I had lots of flexibility, we were making things work. We almost didn't need a fixed schedule, things were quite fluid, and we were able to sort of tag team. As soon as we had my son, that really shifted in that when there's two of them, there is always someone that needs you. You can't sort of like have that same sense of, can you just take the baby for a walk so I can get a little bit of work done? Or, could you just, pop to the park for half an hour while I have a blitz around the house? It's a much more sort of like structured operation. But what was great about writing that book was noticing where so many of these like inherent biases and inherent sort of practices are, like you were saying earlier, Rose, so much of this is just built into our culture. We just accept it as norm. So other things that have really like practically helped are not like not believing that like all of the domesticity stuff falls under me. And we didn't really have that split anyway. My husband has always been tidier and the cook and that kind of thing, but really explicitly going like, what are you responsible for versus me? We talk a lot about this mental load of, you know, while you might not always be doing the practical childcare, you're doing a lot of the emotional and the mental of like, where can, you know, have the children got shoes that fit them? When are they going to move up a nappy size? Have we filled in the forms for nursery? All of that sort of stuff typically tends to fall to the women because we might anticipate that a little bit better. So we try to be very like explicit about those conversations instead of implicit. And we do try to really regularly communicate. So whether it's once a week or once every couple of weeks where we're going like, what is on our list? What do we need to do? What's coming up? You know, we're taking the kids to a festival this weekend. So rather than me thinking, okay, I need to write the packing list and pack the bags today because my husband is off with them, he's saying, we'll go and pick up the camping mattress. We'll go and sort this other thing because we are having that regular communication. And I always think like if I could speak to a younger version of me or younger versions of like my friends or, you know, people that I'm coaching, I think the number one thing is having that supportive partner and really considering who you are choosing to start a family with. Because I've seen, you know, we're of an age where we have been raised to be really ambitious. We've been told women can have it all. We've built these like amazing careers. That is like who I'm surrounded by. That is my friends, my family, my loved ones, the people I went to university with. That has kind of been our MO. And what I just keep seeing time and time again is that like people reach this point of then having children and suddenly it's like, oh no, well, this is my career. This is important. And there isn't that support there. And I think that what has been practically has really helped. I think the other things is being really sort of focused around what I do when. I just have one day a week or typically one day, sometimes a day and a half, where I will actively see clients and coach. And the rest of the time is around some of the more, you know, like my CPD, some of the functions and the admin of the business, that kind of thing. That helps me so that I'm not constantly doing that code switching. And I think there has also been a bit of a acceptance of like not a lowering of my expectations of myself, but like an increase in self-compassion. That before I very much expected that I would always have to be equally productive on every day. And if I didn't get to the end of the to-do list, that was like game over. And now I just have a bit more of a self-compassion that if I have been interrupted a lot throughout the day, or that, you know, if like kids get sent home ill. We had a real run with my son a couple of weeks ago where he had an ear infection, then he had hand, foot and mouth disease, then he had a viral infection. And it meant that he was around the house and it was harder to get things done. And it is that, you know, like you said before, that ruthless prioritization of what actually matters, what can move, and actually having that sense of compassion that if, you know, I know that I would offer this to other people in terms of compassion, accepting and acknowledging that compassion back as well if I have to reschedule or move things.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how did you, as someone who perhaps wasn't naturally self-compassionate, how did you train yourself to be more self-compassionate?
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of digging into that positive psychology toolkit, like I said. And I think for me, one of the best things that I ever heard about self-compassion that kind of opened my eyes to it is that self-compassion is a display of a growth mindset. When we have a very fixed mindset, we have these set expectations. We expect ourselves to behave in the same way all of the time. We beat ourselves up and we don't have that flexibility. And I think hearing that like actually great self-compassion is a display of a growth mindset felt really empowering to me as someone who loves like growth and learning and development. It was like, yes, like there is inherent sort of flexibility there that is required. I also think that writing and researching the Hustle Cure really helped me with that as well, is that this realization that we do live in a man's world. You know, the reason why we are expected to go to work 5 days a week from 9 till 5 and have this sort of like set and sustainable productivity is because a male hormonal clock resets every 24 hours. So they feel typically the same way every single day. Obviously, we do not experience that if you have that sort of female hormonal cycle. Other things like, you know, you're more likely to suffer from insomnia. If you have any sort of neurodivergence, you're more likely you feel those peaks and falls in estrogen more intensely. So you have more of those fluctuations. We have greater expectations placed on ourselves at work in that you don't just have to be competent, you also have to be likable. You also have to be, attractive. We have these beauty ideals. Parenting ideals. Oh, I don't know if you're in this world yet, Bianca, but I just couldn't believe how many very passionate camps there were in terms of parenting ideals and what you should and you shouldn't do. And I think almost writing and researching that book helped me to sort of see just how much we are up against from the outside world. And it feels to me now quite radical to practice some of that self-compassion and to almost go of course I'm not meeting this expectation, because this expectation was set for a man who feels the same way every single day, who has a wife at home, who is taking care of the children, who has all of these other things. And I think, sometimes to me that feels, there's almost like a bit of rebellion there that helps me to practice the self-compassion of, I'm not trying, this isn't a fair game and almost the odds are stacked against us. So how can I play it my way? I think practically what that has looked like, because of course we can know all of these things in theory and we can sort of say and acknowledge these things when we read a research paper or we have a conversation with friends. In theory, what it has looked like is having to really just accept and acknowledge that I cannot do any of the other things if I am not taken care of. And I burnt out at the start of this year because I'd been working that one day a week. I was still breastfeeding my son. We were up in the night a lot and it was just overwhelming that I was trying to keep moving. We also had a house renovation thrown into that, which was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And yeah, just as the dust was falling from the sky as we were having our loft converted. But that was it. That for me was that real reminder and that real wake up call that we're told as women it's selfish to take care of ourselves. It's selfish to prioritize our own joy. It's selfish to do the things that make us feel good. But we absolutely cannot show up for our businesses, our clients, our workplaces, our children, our loved ones, if we are not topped up. And so a lot of it is the self-compassion to do the basics. I will often have a nap during a workday when my children are at nursery, and I feel almost like I'm admitting something really horrendous there, but 20 minutes can reset me, help me get more done throughout the afternoon, help me to be more present when the kids come in, making sure that I can still get out and do some exercise, get out in the garden, do the things that make me feel good. And I think perhaps in early motherhood, there was a little bit of apology for asking for those things and feeling guilty that oh, my husband will have to do an extra hour while I go for a run, or he will have to take a bit of time if I'm going to go and meet my friends. But I think now we've sort of reached this point where we both know how important that time is for both of us, because it helps everything else run more smoothly.
Totally. And it's about building in those small moments of recovery rather than having that 50-50 work-life balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love the point you said just there around the 24-hour cycle versus the 28-day-ish cycle. I actually recently have used AI to set up my second brain. So obviously I work full time, I do the podcast, I just want to make sure I'm managing everything. And I've done that recently around my cycle.
Yeah.
So I'm doing certain things during certain phases of my cycle, but in my luteal phase, I'm not doing a lot.
Yeah.
So I try and get everything out of the way. And it has been life-changing, not to try and put my pressure on myself during that period of the month where I'm feeling a little bit less confident, a little bit more I don't know what's the right word. Yeah, just less myself.
Yeah.
So I think that's amazing. And I think anyone who can, navigate their life around their cycle, even if it is just in small ways, has genuinely been life-changing for me.
Yeah. Oh, same for me. And the thing that I hear so often when I do this work with clients or in workplaces is why weren't we taught this stuff at school? Because for a lot of people, they might not be able to totally reprioritize their workload based on their cycle. But what we can do is cut all of the negative self-talk that we give ourselves. So we can just accept oh, it's a bit, that felt really difficult. And instead of thinking, why did that feel so difficult? I was able to do it 2 weeks ago. I thought I was becoming more confident. And we have that inner monologue, we can cut that, and that saves a lot of energy. There were two things when I was writing the book that really transformed how I sort of think, particularly about productivity. One was the sort of cyclical fluctuations, and also thinking about how that's very different in that early matrescence period because your hormones are all over the place, and having that acknowledgement within that first year, particularly that you don't necessarily have a set, cycle. It's very fluid. The other thing was also seeing I think before I'd perhaps seen, we talk about hormones so negatively, and it's about this sense of oh, you're just feeling hormonal, or oh, my hormones are rampant. Actually, they're like superpowers, and realizing that even in that luteal week, yes, you might not feel as confident and as extroverted, but I find that that's really good deep thinking time for me. It's when I can be really introspective. It's when I can concentrate on something that perhaps during ovulation I feel too scatty and too energetic to be able to do that deep work. And I think we are missing out on so much productivity just as a nation by not talking about and harnessing some of this stuff. So that was the first one. And the other one was sleep chronotypes. So this idea that we actually all have different energetic peaks throughout the day. We talk about early birds and night owls, but there are 4 sleep chronotypes, and they are determined by the length of a piece of DNA. And what I loved about realizing that is I think that we have so much morality around early birds, and you will be more productive if you wake up at 5 a.m. And the best people just wake up and eat the frog and get stuff done. And that just never worked for me. And I just would either be trying to white knuckle and willpower my way through it, or I'd feel guilty that I mustn't be as productive or as determined or as focused as other people. And now I'm actually, my sweet spot is usually between 12 and 4 during the day. That's when I feel great. That's when I can get stuff done. I now try and work towards that, and recognizing that that's not a moral failure, that is determined by the length of a piece of DNA. I think, again, just whenever I go into organizations and talk about that, it unlocks a lot of those conversations around why do we have a huddle first thing during the day? Why do we expect everyone to have finished their work by 5 p.m. when other people might actually have a sweet spot in the evening? And again, I think we've set up the world of work for a very specific type of person, and we're just losing so much great productivity, ambition, innovation, ideas by not having some of that flexibility.
There's so much in what you've said there that I'm already going to take away. The first is almost the gamification of self-compassion.
Yeah.
So thinking this is linked to a growth mindset. I love that. You've just shifted something in my brain with that alone. So thank you. The second thing that I'm taking, and really I've been feeling in a lot of our conversations, that as mothers, we are actually leading the future of work in so many ways. I heard Mark Cuban say that the future of work is actually an arbitrage, a market in time.
Yeah.
It's not going to be about this industrial revolution shaped way of working. And to hear how you've set up your life and your business with so much autonomy, but also real intentionality, I think we know a secret as mothers, which is that laser focus, that ruthless prioritization, that ability to squeeze as much as possible out of an hour, that really, at this point in time, culturally, societally, professionally, all employers should be looking at what time am I paying for? And is this still efficient? And it just makes me so enraged, I suppose, / also inspired that as mothers, we're so ahead of that. We know this intuitively and have done for so long. We're just waiting for the world to catch up. So just wanted to share that as observation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's where so much of my frustration lives, is that I see brilliant friends, brilliant clients who've got to a point in their career where they are absolutely killing it. And we do, as women, prioritize that, and we push forwards for it because we know there are all these statistics around once you reach your 30s, that's the least employable you'll ever be as a woman, because you've got this potential for fertility. And even if that's not what you want, you are still penalized because of having this potential to fall pregnant. And it frustrates me so much because actually I think there is so like I said, it's like a crash course in every skill that is commercial and is viable for an organization. Listening, empathy, time management, being able to multitask, being able to really hone in and problem solve. I imagine, Bianca, you've already solved 15 problems this morning before you sat down to record this at least. And yet we aren't able to tap into these skills, this crash course of life that people are going through, because we have such a fixed mindset about what work is and how it's performed and where the value of work is.
So for any leaders or founders that are listening to this and are running teams and running their businesses, what would be your number one piece of advice?
Have a conversation. I think, I so often go into organizations to consult on their wellbeing strategy or to think about how they get the best from their teams and how we can use positive psychology to do that. And they are looking for like a big program or something they can train someone on or a big idea. And so often when we actually map out what is going on within their organization, so much of it can be solved with a conversation. And I think, a bit like I was talking before, that how we run it as a household is by having to have these very explicit conversations. I think the same is true in organizations. If you've got a new mum returning back, chances are she feels quite anxious. She feels worried about having left her baby for, sometimes the first or second time. She feels worried that she might not be able to do her job as well as she did before. She feels worried that she's being perceived in a certain way. Like actually just creating space and saying, what are you worried about? How can we help? And almost acknowledging, I know that this might feel different from when you were here previously. How can we support that? How can we help you to get the best out of this situation? I think so often we're running on assumptions and we're running on those outdated ideas and stories that we have held as a society for such a long time. And I think if we can say to someone like, that's absolutely fine. You're not going to be judged if you have to go and pick your child up from nursery. It takes so much of the heat and so much of the worry out of that situation, which then allows that person to perform. I think the other really important thing is modeling some of this stuff where we can. It's always stuck with me. And this actually is something I come back to when I think about like my own joy. But when I did my master's, I had a lecturer that said, he was talking specifically about children. He was saying children don't do what we tell them to do. They do what is modeled as safe for them. And he was talking about that from like a happiness perspective, that so often we say, I just want my kids to be happy. And then yet as parents, we don't model that it is safe to do things that make you happy. We model sacrifice and selflessness and all of these things. But it's something that I see reiterated, and there's some really interesting research about it within the workplace, that actually we can tell people you can have flexibility, you can leave on time, you can take the afternoon off to go to the nativity play. But if that isn't modeled by leadership, then actually that just creates a lot of corporate gaslighting. And I think there's some interesting research that shows, I think it was a study looking at like organizations that offered yoga and these things that were supposed to be for well-being. But if actually it didn't feel safe to actually partake in those activities, you were better having no program of well-being activity at all, rather than trying to tell people they could do it, but then them feeling unsafe to actually leave the desk. So I think there's a lot in modeling and showing and living out loud some of the thoughts and ideas here.
I imagine that's the same with unlimited holiday.
Yeah.
Like there's research that says that if you offer unlimited holiday, actually often they end up taking less than the statutory amount.
Yeah. And we see it with shared parental leave, right? Lots of organizations offer shared parental leave, but it isn't taken up because it takes that first brave man to say, or brave partner to say, I'm going to also take the some of the parental leave. And I think actually the more we can just model and show that this is safe, I think that's where a lot of the Scandi countries are getting this right, is it's part of the culture. It's lived and breathed. It's not a policy that's like hidden away on an intranet site somewhere. It is something that people can see, and then therefore they know it's safe for them to partake in as well.
Yeah, one of the really key insights that I found is that a lot of women felt that they didn't have role models internally. So they ended up becoming them. They ended up being the ones putting together parents and carers communities,
Oh,
changing maternity leave, modeling leaving at 3 p.m.
yeah.
and normalizing it. And I think, it just takes one brave person to kind of change the trajectory of what that looks like, and then other people looking up to them as well. So role modeling is huge.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more.
I'd love for us to shift to talk about joy
Yeah.
as a practical, evidence based practice. Sophie, for you, in the early throes of motherhood, when things are really difficult, and there's just a lot, as we said earlier, that we have to problem solve and balance, what has joy looked like? What would you have our listeners know about practicing joy very intentionally,
Yeah.
and the research that you've done on it in some of the more difficult times in life where it can feel a little bit harder to reach?
two things I always come back to. One is that living a joyful life is not about being happy 24/7. It's about giving the good stuff as much attention as we do the bad stuff. And in those early throes of motherhood, our brains are very wired to spot risk. That is part of that matrescence, isn't it? The pruning of our brain to really focus on what could go wrong here. And therefore, I think it's a really important practice to be thinking about what is going right and trying to focus and tune into. And that was something I tried to really do in those early days when it had been a hard day or when it had been a difficult night. Just trying to be like glad that a friend popped around and brought some dinner, or grateful for the cup of tea that like my husband made me when I was sat on the couch for like the 17th hour that day with a baby attached to my boob, or, grateful that we've managed to get out the house and really celebrating like every tiny milestone. I feel like we did a very good job of that. Of like, we celebrated getting out for the first walk. We celebrated the first time we managed to like take the baby for dinner. We celebrated like every little stretch of our comfort zone. So that's not to say everything was like rosy and perfect and magical, but it was about trying to give that good stuff as much attention as the bad stuff. The other thing that I always come back to is that generally, joy tends to live in the present moment. It's like the thing that is available to us right here, right now. It's not planning for something in the future. It's not worrying about something in the past. And I think that's where I got lost a lot in those early days, was worrying about what the next stage was going to be. You get the just you wait brigade of like, well, you might be fine now, but just you wait till the sleep regression, or just you wait until the weaning, or just you wait until and you also get the, oh, did you not do that when you were pregnant? Oh, did you not do that thing? And there is a lot of this like constant anticipation and also guilt for what you have or haven't done, when you were pregnant or in the early days. I remember going for a coffee with someone and she talked about how she'd used these like plaster molds to like make molds of her baby's feet when they were first born. And she's like, it's the most precious thing I own. And I came home and I just sobbed because I was like, I didn't make a mold of my baby's feet. And like that moment has passed. And, I was terrible at filling out the baby books and all of those things. And whenever I was feeling like that, it's like coming back to that present moment, because that's where the joy is. And often, actually in the moment, everything is fine. Not always, but often you're like, I'm really tired, but actually right now I can just sit and have the baby here and I can like sniff their little head and I can have a cuddle and like, or I can go outside and I can feel the fresh air, or I can enjoy the meal, like even if I am eating it one-handed and through like constant burping and, winding and that kind of thing. But often in the present moment, things are okay. It's that our brain, and like I say, it's very difficult in those early days because we are constantly scanning for like, what could be the next thing that's going to go wrong and how can I anticipate that? But any of those practices that can bring us back to the present moment really help. And for me, it was just really simple things like engaging those five senses. Like, what can I hear? What can I smell? What can I taste? Like really coming back to being present. And I know that this one gets like a bit of a bad rep on social media, and it didn't work all of the time, but it did really work for me to think about like, there will be a time when I miss this. There will be a time when like this isn't accessible to me. And it's something I still think all the time now. We've got 2 toddlers now. They run in 2 different directions. It's absolute chaos. Every meal results in like a full scale kitchen, like deep clean afterwards. It is just chaos and we're so tired. But I am very, very aware that in 5 years when they're both in school, I will miss this chaos. I know I will. And I know enough about myself to know which bits I'll enjoy and which bits I don't. And similarly, I also know that like, actually in my motherhood journey, things have continued to get better. Like as they've got bigger, as like they've become their own people, I've enjoyed it more and more. So I think being as rooted in the present moment as I can. And when that feels difficult, when I can't anchor into the present moment, knowing that like, it's that like classic, this too shall pass, and like you can't come back to it. So just trying to make the most of the good bits and also trust that the shit bits change and like, different things follow.
So we have a ritual in this podcast, which is around retiring a term that you may have heard before. And I think for this episode, it would be amazing to focus on your campaign, Shed the Should.
Yes.
Now, I'd love to ask you more about it firstly, and then get into any shoulds that you've shedded around motherhood and ambition.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that you brought this up. So Shed the Should basically came from the fact that I have so many conversations with women every single day, busy women within my coaching practice, women within my life, like, chats on podcasts like this one. And I hear time and time again this idea of like, I should be enjoying this more. I should be doing more. I should be further along by now. And what I always say to everyone is like, should is a real joy killer. It's like the biggest killer of joy, because you can be going to something, you could be doing something amazing. The minute you say, I should, it's almost like this like teenage rebel, like Kevin and Perry is like how I imagine the should in my head. It's like slothing around being like, oh, don't want to. That I'm like, oh, I should go to someone's birthday drinks on Friday. Like we can make something that can feel really gorgeous feel awful. And so we really wanted throughout June to sort of get people talking about this idea and noticing where the sheds come up. As we've alluded to so many times in this conversation, so much of how we live and our expectations and what we prioritize is governed by this set of shoulds of like how women have been perceived in the past, what the expectations are, what our roles are. And so I wanted to just really encourage people to think about and notice where they're doing things because they feel like they should and what they might replace that with and what they might do instead. So we had some really interesting ones where people were saying like, feeling like they should be like further along, and then just saying like, actually, I really enjoyed having lots of different careers, or I've enjoyed exploring different avenues, or, I should spend more time on a certain thing. Like, actually, is that something that we want, or is the fact that we're not doing that an act of resistance? And is that telling us something? Is that information? And it was interesting because we developed this campaign. And like I say, it's something I've been working with clients individually on for years and years. But it was only as we were actually running through the campaign in June and we were sharing other women's stories and we were sharing ideas and a guide that I was realizing just like how many of them are still present. Because, again, going back to what we started with, you can know the expertise and like your experience of it can still be very, very different. And I think some of the shoulds that I've had to shed in motherhood, I've definitely had to shed this idea that I should be in any sort of parenting camp. I always say like somewhere in the middle is about what I feel like. I think, and I can understand and I can empathize with why there are such like, people have such strong feelings about whether you should breastfeed or whether you should bottle feed, whether you should sleep train or whether you should co-sleep, whether you should, there are all of these shoulds. And I had so many ideas before I became a mom about like what I would and wouldn't do. And actually what I found over time is like usually somewhere in the middle is where what I land on. Like we were very lucky to be able to combi feed both babies. We haven't sleep trained, but we try and have like a bit of a routine and a bit of a schedule, and we flex with that and like trying to just find somewhere in the middle. So that's like one thing, is shedding the should that I should have like a specific ideology around parenting. And instead I just like try to meet our family as we are and figure out what works for us in any season. I should be less ambitious is another one. And I think it's this, this funny idea that I've had that you should be, like ever present and like almost like this, like Mother Earth kind of, I will be there for every like whim and demand of my child. And I really thought I was going to be like that. And actually, I'm still like super passionate about my work and I still want to do things. And there will be times when I'm away from my kids. And, I went back to work after both children, only 1 day a week, but after both kids when they were like 10 weeks old. And I got a lot of like, I did get a lot of judgment for that. Lots of people in the mum WhatsApp group saying, "Oh, I could never. It's just not something I could do." And I've had to just go like, "That's what's worked for me, and it's what's worked for my family." And there are trade-offs to all of this, in that like I get a little bit more flexibility because I work for myself, but that meant that I had to work a little bit earlier. So some of those shoulds, and the biggest should is like that I should have it all together. Like our home is always a mess. There is always laundry overflowing out of the basket. There are always emails that are unanswered because I'm busy like filling the paddling pool or whatever it might be. And someone gave me some really great advice in the early days of motherhood. She said, be where your feet are. And that has been so grounding for me that if I'm in the garden and we're filling the paddling pool, I'm not also checking my emails. If I'm at my desk here today, I'm not worrying about what the sound of like the tiny hooves are running above the ceiling above me. I'm like, my husband has got that covered. Like that's his domain for the day. And that has really helped me, is to just let go of the idea that any of this is ever going to be perfect. The laundry basket thing is such a great example of, you can try to get on top of it and then you take your clothes off at the end of the day and there's more laundry in the basket. It's like an undefeatable thing. It's not what I'm going to shape my whole week around. The same with the house. I can make everything look beautiful and then we'll feed the kids and there's like Weetabix splattered up the wall. So I can't make that my priority because I'm never ever going to get on top of that. What I can make my priority is trying to be present wherever I am. And I think that's, I've had to sort of step away from this idea that I should be able to do it all and I should be able to be always on in all facets, and instead just try to really be present in the moment wherever I am.
I love that. Like, yes, you're a mother, you're not a martyr.
Yeah.
Like you've got to do something that works for you and your family. I think that's incredible advice there, Sophie. Thank you so much for sharing.
You have shared so much wisdom in this episode. I feel like we need a part 2. So much that you've done genuinely neuroplasticity wise for me in this one conversation where I'm thinking, oh my God, I can reframe this. I can take this as a practical, it's just fantastic.
I see so often women and mums particularly putting joy at the bottom of the to-do list and feeling like it is a thing they'll get to, I'll have a cup of tea once the kids are in bed, or I'll finally do something once we've got through it, everything on the to-do list. But the thing that I always come back to is that what the research tells us is that prioritizing joy positively impacts every single thing we care about. It positively impacts our physical health. It impacts our relationships. We can be more compassionate to others. We can be more present for other people. It positively impacts our careers. The more you enjoy what you are doing, the more passion you can find for your work, the higher the chance of you being successful. And most importantly for motherhood, I think, is that it positively impacts our adaptability and our resilience. You can deal with stress, you can deal with life's changes so much more effectively if you've filled your cup. And this weekend, I mentioned earlier, we were just at a festival where I was running some talks. And it was the first weekend where we'd left both children for 2 nights with my wonderful parents who are very keen grandparents, thankfully for us. And there was that tension and that, started some of that guilt coming of are we doing the right thing? And it was kind of weird that I felt more able to go away because it was for work rather than just for fun, which is interesting in and of itself. But actually, we had this gorgeous, joyful weekend where my husband and I got to spend some time together. We had some really interesting conversations with people. We ate great food. We were out in the sunshine. And I have been a much calmer, a much more present mum, a much more enthusiastic mum. When my little girl is saying, can you get down and play with me? Normally, I have a bit of do I have to? It's not my natural default. But this morning, it's okay, yeah, sure, we can get straight down and we can play with the dolls and we can do these things. And I think that is so important that we sometimes forget, is that we see it as something that's selfish or something that we should put on the back burner, but it positively fuels everything we care about. And it could be, that was a bold example of a full weekend away, but it can be literally a 10-minute walk around the block. Or I think I've heard you mention on previous episodes, Bianca, taking time to put your makeup on or have a nice shower or read a bit of your book, or even just cook the meal that you really want to eat that night, whatever it might be. Just those little bursts remind us that we are human as well. And we are, we need to live and experience life in order to be able to facilitate for that for other people too.
That's so beautifully said. Sophie, I could talk to you all day. Thank you for everything you've shared. Where can our listeners learn more about you and your work?
Yes, so I have a website, sophiecliff.com. I share quite a lot over on Instagram, where I'm at Sophie Cliff. I also have a podcast called Practical Positivity, where we try to share I often see my work as the bridge between a lot of the academic research that lives in these fusty journal articles that no one is ever going to read, and the real life that we've got, and knowing that, in an ideal world, we might do these perfect practices and use these interventions. So it's kind of the middle ground between that of how can we take some of that great stuff from research and put it into our real lives. So we talk about that a lot on my podcast, Practical Positivity. And then probably most useful for your audience, I would say, is my book that I mentioned, The Hustle Cure, which is really looking at how not only can we sort of come to terms with some of these differences in productivity, but how can we just really own some of this stuff and own the fact that we might have different strengths and we might have different opportunities and our work-life blend might look differently. How can we use that to our advantage instead of always feeling we're on the back foot and we're trying to keep up with something that, a game that was rigged against us.
I love that. Sophie, thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much for being here and listening. Conversations like this are exactly why we started this podcast, and I hope you're leaving it feeling a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit more permitted to do things your own way. If this episode gave you something, please do subscribe so you never miss one, and come and find us over on Instagram. We genuinely love hearing from you over there. And if there is someone in your life who needs to hear this, a friend, a colleague, a sister, who is quietly holding a lot right now, please send it to them too. That is honestly the kindest thing you can do for a small podcast like ours, and it is how these conversations reach the women who really need them. We also wanted to finish this episode by letting you know that we're taking August off for a little summer break. Those of you who've been with us for a while will know that I have my dissertation due in just over a month, so I'm getting my head down to get it finished. But we will be back in September with more brilliant guests and more honest conversations. Thank you so much for being part of this. Have a wonderful summer, and we will see you on the other side.